Welcome back to Rough Draft, the Young Journalist podcast. It's been quite a while since the last episode, but as they say, quality over quantity. Today I'm speaking with Caden, a reporter with business news site The Currency. How are you doing today, Koch?
I'm good, Jamie. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. I mean, you're also a former College View person, so that basically guarantees like an invite in the podcast.
Very good.
I'm a bit biased that way. So to just start off from the beginning, like right from the get-go, was there ever a point in your life where you realized you wanted to be a journalist, or was it kind of like a very slow, gradual process?
Do you know what? It's a good question because there wasn't. And when I was doing my leaving cert, I actually had up until very late in the day, or maybe it was midway through or something like that. I remember it was fairly late on and all my friends knew what they wanted to do. And I had law down for like most of my CEO. And I remember I was doing my history research project for Leaving Cert History. And I remember the guy that I was interviewing for it, he's a local historian and actually a great fella. And we keep in touch as well, called Stephen Dunford. And he was helping me out. And he at the end of it, he's just like, and what do you want to do? And I was just like, oh, I'm putting down law. And he said, I actually think you should do journalism. I've talked to a few reporters in my time, and I think you'd be good at it. I think you'd be interested in it. And in my head, I actually didn't realize you could just become a journalist. I always thought that, you had to be, I never really saw young journalists, and I thought you had to be something else before you did it. Like Marion Finucane did architecture and stuff like that before she became one of the best journalists Ireland has ever seen. So I never thought about it that way. And then I looked into it and I saw that actually there's several courses that you could do journalism in. And I had a very different idea of what journalism would be until I started. And it just so happened that I fell more in love with the reality than of the concepts that I had thought up. And it's an interesting question because when I went into journalism, our course was not very small, but smaller than, say, communications. And then I remember the next year, and this was like I put down journalism on my CEO in 2015. I took a year out before I went to college. And so this was before Brexit, it was before Trump. And so I started in 2016 with my fellow classmates. And, that was the year that, Trump got elected for the first time. And well, actually the only time, thank God. And also Brexit happened and that kind of thing. So all of a sudden there was a massive interest in media and focus on the media and those in the media. And you saw that then with the people who came after us. They're like, I remember a lecturer of ours called it the Trump bump. So I think it was really interesting that, people are so interested in the work that journalists do and people in the media do now. Whereas back in the day, it was kind of like a thing where, and it is quite a bizarre profession. You go around and you just ask people what they're doing or what's going on here, or you know what I mean? It is quite an intrusive career. But no, to answer your question, it was kind of an out of nowhere decision. But to be honest, it kind of was staring me in the face the whole time. Like I've always been very chatty and nosy. But yeah, so thank God that I did that interview with the great Stephen Dunford, who put me in the right direction.
That's brilliant. And it turned out to be a very good decision in the long run, I suppose.
Yes, it did indeed. Yeah. And I can't imagine myself doing anything else. So yeah. So that's how I got here.
The Trump bump, like that's a great phrase. Like I've only just found out about that now.
There you
We
go.
really do live in interesting times for journalism, like for better or worse. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me, like I didn't know what I wanted to do for so long, but I knew I like learning stuff and like explaining stuff to other people. And then I did my first bout of like TY work experience in a pet shop in like a business retail park or whatever. And then for the second week, a few months later, ended up going to the radio station directly next door. That's like weird coincidence.
Very good.
I mean,
There
good
you
thing I
go.
didn't end up going into like the pet shop business or, God knows where I'd be.
I know. Actually, just on that, I remember when I did my TY work experience, I worked one week in my mother's primary school. She was a teacher there, and then she became vice principal. She's retired now, only recently. But I remember her and my past teachers there, because I went to the same school. I think they went out of their way to make it as boring as possible. Like, we just did, myself and my friend Letitia, we did an awful lot of shredding, and I think it kind of motivated us to like find something. Well, I actually quite liked the classroom bit, but they made it so it was brutal. And yeah, I never went into I didn't do any experience in journalism until my final year, and I did a brief stint in the local newspaper. But yeah, it's very funny actually, when I ring people to do interviews. They ask me my name and I give it to them, and they say, "You anything to John Caden and Sarah Caden?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm John Caden's youngest daughter, and I'm Sarah Caden's youngest sister." And they're like, "Oh my God, that's mad." And they're like, "Oh, so it's in the family anyway, is it, journalism?" And I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute, no," because apparently there was a John Caden in RTE, and obviously the journalist Sarah Caden then is his daughter. But my farmer father and my sister, who's a teacher, they're certainly not them. But yeah, so it's mad, the kind of little connections that you make along the way.
Yeah, brilliant. And like, did you ever have a sort of a dream journalism job at any point? Like, as you were kind of getting more involved and you're going your way through college, was there anything you kind of like aspired to reach, like a certain job at a certain paper or anything like that, or how did it go?
Yeah, I definitely think, like, I was so heavily involved with video journalism when I was in college, and also with the College U. And I suppose, like, back then, I think Channel 4 News is probably like, it's the kind of shining star job. But one of the main reasons that I went for the job and the currency, and like, I said it when I was first talking to Tom and Ian as well, is that I had no background in business. I didn't even study it for the Leaving Cert. And I just think, Irish people hold such um a love, and like such a draw for business. Like, we're real entrepreneurs, we're real upstarters. And I think it's really important that you have people who are, invested in learning more about it and reporting on it. And so I think, when as I progressed through my years in university, there started to be a lack of a dream job and more of an emphasis on becoming as good a reporter as I possibly could. And that meant going places where, I didn't know an awful lot about, and I did not know an awful lot about business journalism, which I hope I can say that I do now for sure. But I thought it was like a really important area to learn more about, and to, interview the people in that area and stuff like that. So yeah, I think back in the day I would have said something in video journalism, maybe Channel 4 News. But I think now, it's definitely about knowing as much as you can and talking to as many people in as many different areas. And even if those areas are very new and out of your comfort zone, that's kind of the dream now, is to become the best in each area.
Wow, brilliant. Yeah, that's a lot better than the way I would have put it. I mean, a few years ago, someone asked what kind of job I was aiming for, and I said I wanted to work for Waterford Whispers, but I've set my sights a little bit
Oh,
higher.
that's plan B. That is the second dream. I mean, that'd be great.
Just every headline is like Varadkar or COVID or something. Oh God.
Yeah. Although they did get into an awful lot of trouble recently, but sure, that's what satire is for.
Yeah. Oh, that's why we need them. But
Exactly.
yeah, you mentioned like, so what was your kind of aptitude for like business before you kind of went towards the currency? Like, were you naturally, I know you didn't do it for the Leaving Cert, but were you kind of good at it? Did you have a knack for it? Like, how did you kind of gravitate towards that kind of journalism?
No, absolutely zero. After college, I did an internship, and then, it just transpired that there was no full-time jobs. I did my internship in Ireland AM, in Virgin Media, and I absolutely loved it. It was a really unique environment, and I loved especially doing the early morning shifts, and being able to research and book and see a guest tell their story live on air, which is something I got to do from scratch. That was it was a real privilege to tell stories that way. But they had no full time jobs going at the time, when I finished, and they did offer for me to stay on and do shifts, but just because, I had to pay rent and stuff like that, it wouldn't have worked. So I'm, like many other people in my year, we applied for different jobs and that kind of thing. And one of the jobs I applied for was the currency. And the reason I applied to the currency was it was just, you know what I mean? It was just so new and it was so different. And is so different, so exciting. I mean, like, Tom and Ian, the way they founded it was, really interesting. They just had the big battle with he who should not be named. And well, he can be now, he's no longer in Irish media, Dennis Ryan, but and they're rock stars in Irish journalism, and they went off and they founded this publication that is super different and has evolved over time. Like we have Dion Fanning now doing the weekends publication with different stuff like culture and politics and sport. So, but I suppose the gravitation was just that, it's so when you're starting out in your professional career, I think it's the time to take chances. Like, you're not married, you don't have kids. And even though the two founders are married and have kids, they still made this huge risk that pulled off. And I just think it was so exciting. And again, it was that whole thing of, I didn't know an awful lot about business journalism, and it is held in such high regard in Ireland. And as well, like, one of the big things is during the banking crash, or the financial crash in 2008 and the banking crisis. I mean, we lived through that. Like, I was a boom baby, and well, kind of. I don't want to kind of share my age, but and we saw how that affected our parents and everything like that, and we saw how brilliantly some journalists reported on it and how badly some got it, and they got it really wrong, and they didn't inform the Irish people properly. And now I don't think that I'm in the position now that I would know the ins and outs of I wanted to be part of a team that did have that kind of expertise behind them and learn from them. And it's such an important piece of Irish society is business and everything that goes into it. So that was the draw to it. It was really the fact that they had done something so different and so brave and so new, and also the fact that I knew very little about it. And I mean, if I got the job, I'd be in a very privileged position to be one of their first hires, and to learn about something that I really didn't have any knowledge in. And again, just to kind of make myself a better reporter.
Yeah, you put it so well there, like kind of the unique sort of nature of the currency. And, considering how you sort of got in there right as you had just finished college yourself and right as they were kind of the site was taken off, like what was it like being there in the first few months? Like what was the atmosphere like?
Oh yeah, definitely. There was a very much a learning curve for me, because not only was it business journalism, it was feature journalism, which was definitely not my niche. And like I had done an awful lot of news in college. Even in college, in my weekends I worked for the business show on RT. I was broadcast coordinator for that. So like I had very little experience doing long form feature writing and no experience doing business journalism writing, bar doing a module with Kevin Rafter in final year. So there was certainly a massive learning curve, yeah. But the beauty of that was that I was there a full month before we launched. So we got stuff rolling. We all of us had pieces ready to go and that kind of thing. We were working on stuff that would be there. And the mentorship that I received and still do receive, it was great. I mean, it's not every day that you get to actually just sit down with the chief executive and the editor, and we all get to do that, and we all get to hear direct feedback about stuff and that kind of thing, and what works, what doesn't work, and what we should be looking at. So yeah, it was a learning curve, and it was a lot to digest and a lot to work on and a lot to get used to from my end, but it was so much fun. Like it's definitely, it was so much fun. It is so much fun being a part of something that is so new and so different. And just because it was a small team as well, there was a great buzz.
Brilliant. Glad to hear that it still is so much fun. Great
Yeah.
clarification.
Like I mean, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like we're not in the office now and we're all working from home. So that does kind of impact the fun. But yeah, it's still going.
The fund has dropped 5% on the Isaac index.
5%. Yeah, exactly.
So you made like a lot of really interesting points there that I hope to circle back to. But something else you mentioned earlier was, well, I'll explain it for anyone listening that doesn't understand. But basically, so not long after you would have started the currency, there was a big situation in which Communicorp banned all of the currency's journalists from appearing on their radio stations, and then the
It was
ban.
actually the day we launched.
Wow.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even wait a little while. But so what was it like being there among like first day among all the sort of surprise and confusion? Like what was the situation going on at the time?
Oh, I don't know. I just think, I think the people who would best answer this would probably be Tom and Ian, because I just think it was just such a draw, because like it was great. It was nearly like a big show that we did so well, and um like we did so well on the first day, and it only went up. But I think it was just that they had dealt so much with this man, and then for this to happen on the day we launched, I wouldn't say it was anticlimactic. I think it was just a bit of an eye roll, you know and it was just, I just can't believe that this kind of crack was still going on in 2019. So that's when we launched. Like we launched in September 2019, and I mean, like, there was a lot of excuses made about who was, like, why it was done, and they said that we were a competitor. But I mean, like, then if that was the case, you'd have nobody on air, you'd have no journalists appearing, you know what I mean? It was just, yeah, I don't think it didn't affect the day at all. And it was like that day was such a buzz. It was such a great buzz. And it was great to get the site. It was great to be there. And it was a real historical moment, like, and to be an online, a digital first subscription only model to launch in Ireland, that focused very heavily on business journalism and very high quality stuff. Like it was just such a historic moment, and it was a great buzz. And no matter what happened, like we had that. But I think it was just kind of like, I can't imagine what Tom and Ian felt about it, but or even Francesca as well. She used to work in News Talk, and then obviously she was with the lads in the Sun of Business Post, and then this happened in the currency. Like, do you know what I mean? I don't know how they felt, because I mean, it obviously was a lot more complex for them. But I think definitely from my point of view, I was just like, oh my God.
That's brilliant. Yeah, you said there a few times you're really buzzed. Like that's so funny because I literally have written in my wee notes. You must have been pretty buzzed. Glad to know we're on the
Yeah,
same page.
yeah, it was a great day. It was a fantastic day.
And yeah, you mentioned there like the currencies like subscription. So for anyone who doesn't know, the currency charges €200 a year for access to its like interviews and its podcasts and its other brilliant content, or $5 a month for your first month. Just throwing that there for my 10 or 20 listeners. So if your
Yeah.
boss to see a tiny increase in membership, they know who to thank. I know a few journalists, they have like their work behind, paywalls or something. And like, they'd say, oh, it's kind of a pain. I can't send this to my mum or whatever. Like, do you ever, obviously that money is well needed for, you and your colleagues like salaries. And it goes a long way in making like that brilliant, like features and like in-depth business content. But is it ever a bit of a pain that you're like, oh, I wish I could send this to such a one, but they wouldn't be able to see it? That type of thing.
No, not at all, really, because now I will get into another kind of area of this in a minute, but the real pain is when people, especially like, interviewees who, you explain where you're from, and you say this is for the currency, and you explain what the currency is, and when it's published, they go, there's a paywall here, I can't see it, send it to me. I'm just like, my God, the gall, like, do you know what I mean? It's just, you
Yeah.
wouldn't ask a GP for a free visit. You wouldn't ask, I don't know, a waiter for a free meal or a restaurant for a free meal. You know what I mean? It's like going in being just like, well, I don't know. I just think it's ridiculous, but especially for the kind of journalism we are now. Like one thing personally that I think, gets very difficult in the whole paywall situation. And I know Anya Kerr in Kinsen and formerly of Spotify, or it's not Spotify, Storyful, has talked about this quite extensively before, is about the difficulty of providing public service journalism and then also being paid for your work, and putting a value on journalism. Like, that's a very tightrope to walk. Now, what we do is public interest journalism, especially like, say, the Davy stuff that the lads did. That was phenomenal writing, phenomenal reporting and investigating. But I suppose where I'm going with this is stuff like COVID. And I remember seeing it, and I won't name the publication, but I remember a publication had something breaking. It was like very early days, and it was to do with COVID, and it was a short enough story, and they had it behind the paywall. And I understand it. I understand why they did it. I mean, like, journalists need to get paid. There needs to be value put on journalism. But there is that very sensitive area of, trying to get stuff out there, and also, having to be paid and having to pay for the kind of quality you get. And that's where, I think RT and the Journal do great work. Both. I don't know about the Journal, but I know like RT's funding obviously has been in the news quite a bit. So I don't know, it's something for people who are much smarter and have been in the industry much longer than me will figure out. I know for certain eventually, because they'll have to. But it is a conundrum. Like, that is a conundrum. But in terms of what the currency provides, like, I do see where people are kind of like, we should have access to this, but also, one story behind one story is so many investigations, or so many big interviews, or so many other things, like, you know what I mean? So there has to be value put on journalism. Like, there has to be, you have to pay for it, and the public need to come around to that. But it is something that needs to kind of be figured out. In terms of, can I send it somewhere? Can I do this? No, I don't really, I don't feel like that. And also, again, I have to say it just for emphasis, it really, really does annoy me. And I know a lot of other people, when people just say, what's the story with this? I can't get into it. It's behind a paywall. Of course it is. Like, we work like anybody else,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems that journalism is at a bit of a crossroads at the minute, and even like the most veterans themselves don't really know exactly which way things are going to head. But yeah, it reminds me of like something on Twitter I saw a while ago of like someone being like, "Oh, I printed out one of your paintings and I gave it to my brother for his birthday." And it's like, you can buy those. You're just telling me, "Oh, I stole this from you." Like, basically,
Yeah.
like, that's kind of seems to be
I
what's
mean,
going on.
more
But yeah.
like the fact that NFTs are becoming so popular and people won't pay for journalism is just, I think, a real show of the kind of world we live in. Like, madness.
Yeah, exactly. We should launch an NFT of like your first College View article or something like
Oh,
that. That'd
Jesus,
be
I don't,
pretty
I
good.
don't know who would pay for that. My mother, I think, but that's about it.
Start the billing at €2.50.
Actually, do you know, my first article for the College View was on Dennis O'Brien. So there you go. It was on, it was on the censorship of media and stuff like that. Yeah, can't remember exactly what it was about, but it was on. Yeah, I remember talking to a lecturer for it, and I think it was about the buying of Virgin Media, I think, and Dennis O'Brien was involved with it or something like that. I think but anyway, so that was it.
I'm sure you're like, I wonder if this Dennis O'Brien will ever be a major figure in my life again in relation to censorship.
I never
Probably
really
not.
thought about it, but I don't even know, was it him, or yeah, it was definitely on the censorship of media, and that was the first article that I wrote for the College View. So there you go. Swings and swings and roundabouts, should I say?
Yeah. And of course, I have to have the obligatory question about, student journalism.
Yeah.
And so obviously you were quite active as a news editor of the College View in your time. So what was it like back then? Because, looking at your backlog, like, it seems you've God knows how many articles up. Like, how was your time at the College View?
Oh, it was great. It was so good. And for anybody who's kind of saying that they will focus more on the studious part of college, listening to this, like, absolutely. I mean, you pay an awful lot to be where you are and you want to do well, but also the stuff that the College View the kind of things that you learn from that and the friendships that you make. I mean, I would say one friendship in particular, the editor at the time, Callum Lavery. I mean, we had a very much a love-hate relationship when I was working, when we worked together for the College View. But he's like one of my best friends, like a really dear friend. But we still argue about stuff that happened in the College View. So, but yeah, no, it was a great time. And, you know, I wrote stuff, not even just the experience, but I wrote stuff that I'm still immensely proud of. Like, I remember one story in particular, a DCU student who was present, who was in Greece when the Greek fires happened, shared his story with me. And he gave me the pictures, and it was a real privilege to be able to tell that story. And he just, you know, he was so emotional about it, and you know, really shared what must have been like one of the worst times of his life and the scariest. And it was a real privilege to be able to tell that story. And I told it for a college newspaper. So yeah. But yeah, so I did the College View, and I also was head of DCU TV News, which I don't think is there anymore, unfortunately, which I think is a big mistake, because video journalism is so worthwhile in pursuing. But it was part of MPS. So yeah, so we did an awful lot there as well. And myself and another one of my best friends, Ali Clare, we did extensive reporting on the nursing strikes in 2018, 2019. So through the College View and DCU TV News. So yeah, like, I mean, people kind of scoff at stuff like college journalism and stuff, but I mean, the lessons you learn, the stories you tell, and the friendships that you make, I know that sounds really cringy, but so worthwhile. So worthwhile.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I remember like my first story with the College View was something about they changed the name. I've told this story way too many times in this podcast. They changed the name of Shite Night to Devotion. So I was there at Shite Night or at Devotion, sorry, quote unquote Devotion, covering the events, and then came in the fortnight later for the next news meeting, and they were like, yeah, there's a conference in Dublin about female genital mutilation. Does anyone want to cover that? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, such a juxtaposition between those two things, but that's one of the, you know, that kind of experience is probably one of the best things about it, to just throw yourself in at whatever happens to be up in the news that weekend when you go.
And that brings me back to the whole point of, you know, it's a very bizarre career and it's very intrusive, but it's one of the best careers that you can have. You know, you tell stories for a living. You get to talk to as many people as you can. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, like the other great thing about student journalism is like the amount of people I met through the College View that don't even study journalism that I'm now like close friends with. And I'd be like, here, can I send you this article? Take a quick look at it. And it's like, good old times, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I have to say, like, I mean, it was such a great team. When I was in the College, it was a phenomenal team that ran it. And I know you had Gabia, who now is a reporter in the Independent, and she was deputy editor in chief. And you had Brendan on this before, and he was editor in chief and is also in the Independent. And I mean, Tig has done great work in the Journal, and Amy Dublin Live, and I know we've had a good few others. So, like, you know, all of those people worked in the College View, so or didn't work, we didn't get paid, obviously, but you know, we all did stuff for the College View. And I think that just shows that you are in a simulated environment when you're working for a college publication, whether be it DCU FM, DCU TV News, or whatever it is now, or the College View. It's so important that you immerse yourself in that, because like, I remember when I went for my intra in Virgin Media, they weren't really that bothered with you know, what I knew in college or anything like that. They were more invested in what I did with DCU TV News, and they asked me about those stories. And you know, it's the same, you know, I've talked about the College View before with people who, you know, are in the industry. So I would highly recommend you, either, even if you don't have a position, do as much as you can. Like, I know like my another really good friend of mine, Dave Kelly, didn't have a position in the paper, but he was nominated for S Media for his work with College View. So, be as involved as you can. It's one of the best advices I can give is just immerse yourself in college publications.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even though COVID has kind of ruined things, like there's still a great team, and even aside from the team, like great contributors showing up every single Zoom, and it's really brings a, well, I wouldn't say a tear to your eye. That's a bit far, but it it's good to see. Good to see the
Yeah.
people doing their best.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned earlier just like college grades versus what you're doing outside of your course,
Mhm.
and this is quite a list here. So you're quite busy like in your final year. So apart from all the other stuff we mentioned, like your work with the College View or DCUTV, you were arts and culture editor of Stan.ie. You won a
Oh,
Student
wow.
Media Award for road safety journalism, and you were nominated for a Hybrid Award. So did you ever find it like difficult to balance your time between assignments and coursework and trying to get good grades with trying to
Um,
sort of do as much as you could?
yes and no. I worked on Saturdays as well in RT. Just throwing that out there, just in case I didn't give a shout out to the business beforehand. I think I did, but I don't know. I think there was an awful lot of I think in anyone's final year, there's always going to be some fatigue and tears at times. I think just emotions run high, and actually, we used to call the college view room. Do you still have the office, the little office, like between the Mac lab and the where Damien has all the equipment? But
Yeah, I think we do, but I haven't been lucky enough to see it myself so far.
yeah, we used to have that. We used to call it the college room slash napping room slash crying room. So there's quite a few people who went in there just to kind of let out the frustrations. I mean, I think it's a case of you want to do really well, but you also want to do as much journalism as possible. Now, I didn't really do the freelance circuit when I was in college, so I actually could have been busier. I know people that were busier, but I devoted my Saturdays to the business, and then I did the College View. I was news editor for the College View, and then I was head of DCTV News. And I mean, the award then for road safety authority came from my work in the College View, and then the hybrid media nomination came from my work with DCTV News. So that was grand. But yeah, I mean, I think with anybody in final year, like you do struggle with time. But I would actually, on this point, I would actually say, because I am conscious that your listeners would be maybe in final year and second year, that time management is probably just in general the most important thing that you can do in journalism. But for people like I have an underlying health condition, and I don't talk about it often, but I do find that you know I will sacrifice something to do and to do more, to try and do more work, but that always ends up negatively affecting me. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just conscious that there is definitely people in your course, whether they talk about it or not, that have something going on in the background. May not even be health related, maybe something else. But I think just if and I like I mean I don't have a magic bullet for this. I'm still trying to figure out how to manage my time correctly. And I actually think if I did it more in college, and I figured out a system that worked for me, which benefited both like my health and my work ethic, I'd be in a better place now in terms of functionality and that kind of thing. So I do think if you can get it right now, and I know it's more easily said than done, that you focus on really getting into a good flow and a system flow. And that doesn't mean that you have to be overly healthy. I mean, people go out, they drink, they do all that when they're in college. But definitely try and structure your work life more, because I think what the last year has taught us is that your health is so important above all else. Whether it's your mental well-being, your physical health. I think people have really thought an awful lot more about themselves outside of work, and stuff that goes on in their lives outside of that. So I think, things can get on top of you, and things got on top of me in final year. But I think the main thing is you have the opportunity now, you have the space to really figure out what works for you. And, everybody has something going on. So I think it may sound really cheesy or whatever, but that's probably actually the most important thing I could say to you, because if you can figure out a good workflow in final year, because you will be launched into your professional career after that. You'll do your intra, or you'll do work placement, or you'll do a dissertation or something like that, and then bam, you're going to be working. So I think it's a good opportunity now in final year to really figure out what makes you healthy and what makes you work best.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree 100%. Like, especially during COVID, like even as well, you said the thing about health, but like people have really, when you're sitting at a desk for several hours a day and you've got other stuff to do at home and all that, people have really had to put more of an emphasis on getting what they can do done in time, and taking a bit of time for yourself to just kind of avoid burning themselves out completely.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. You're no good. I was speaking to someone else recently, and they had a great quote, and they said, they're no good if they're burnt out. And I mean, like, so simple, but so true.
yeah, exactly. And so you mentioned they were working on the business for RT Radio 1. I believe, according to my extensive research, you were broadcast coordinator, right?
I was broadcast coordinator.
Good to know I have it right. So like, what was it like working there on Saturdays? Just trying to, was it hectic, or how did things come about there?
You know what? It was so peaceful, and it was like one of my favorite moments of the week. Because we were on at 10 a.m. So I like to get in at about 7:30, or maybe a little bit before that. And I wasn't even able to do much, because you'd have to wait for the producer to kind of get what you'd have to do, and that kind of thing. But you just got to like be there. And oh God, his name escapes me now, and I'm really sorry it has, because he's such a gentleman, and he wore a suit every day in the newsroom, and he'd go down, he'd read the bulletins and stuff like that. And he's a veteran radio journalist. But he was just the most gentlemanly man, and we'd have a great chat before just everything got started. But just the whole atmosphere in there was great, and you could see the newsroom, kind of the radio room, fill up as the morning went on, and the buzz that started even on a Saturday. Like, that's what I really loved. Like, even on a Saturday, it was still like really energetic and stuff. But I think we were the first live show to go on a Saturday, so you could go down to the studio, and part of my job was to kind of set up the studio, set up the social media, and turn on the monitors, and set up the software that goes on actually in studio. So there's definitely a few, like, probably shouldn't even say this, but a few fangirl moments where you got to sit in the chair of the main studio and kind of like set up the desk and stuff like that. So it was yeah, I mean, it was like, I know it's not, again, it's cringy to say, but it was magical. And yeah, like, I mean, it was busy, but I mean, there were days where you'd have a minute to have a clip, and you'd need something edited, you need something either added on, or you'd need it clipped off, and you'd have a minute to run up to the desk, put it through the system, do that, get down, put it out. I mean, that's the joy of live radio. No, it was amazing. It was fantastic. And even, it's so funny, I used to bump into Blonadney Coffee most Saturdays when I worked in RT. Actually, their nationwide was just a desk down from us. And it was just great banter then, because she was at the Smedias, and we bumped into each other, and we had a great laugh. Like, so it's a really nice environment, I would say.
That's wonderful. Yeah, just fangirling on a chair. That's such a
Oh
funny.
yeah, no, it was like, I remember the first few times I was down there. And I was just like, and when I left, I had to leave for my intra. And when I left, I was training in my replacement, and you could see like they were the exact same. Like, it was just like such magic to them, going in and seeing everything. And yeah, it was great.
So yeah, a slight transition from radio to podcasting. So you're occasionally on the Currencies podcast. Not too long ago, you did a podcast with Hazel Chu, where you talked about, like, obviously sort of business related, financial things like CETA and that kind of thing, but also just general sort of political stuff and public life. And I was wondering, is it like refreshing to do sort of work that isn't fully related to the world of business, or maybe not as obviously business focused as other things that you do
Um,
are?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question because I've actually never thought about it, because most people who you talk to in business are real characters. Again, it's quite and like, especially if they've created their own business, like it's again, it's kind of like journalism. It's a really niche area of life where you go, geez, this doesn't work. I'm going to set up something that will make this work in life, or make this simpler, or stuff like that. And I mean, in terms of Hazel Shoe, yeah, it was definitely a different interview. I mean, it was politics. You have to come at it in a different way. And she's great. She is someone that is used to interviews and media, and usually business people want more to talk about their business and that kind of thing, whereas someone who's in politics is aware of the kind of they're used to questions, and they're kind of media trained and that kind of thing. And that's not just Lord Mayor Shue, it's everybody in politics. So it was refreshing. It was a different kind of interview, and it was interesting. Like most interviews, though, I mean, you're learning something, you're telling a story, and all of them are interesting. I interviewed before her, I interviewed the actor Liam Cunningham, and you know a lot of our conversation ended up being about the business of acting and how everything is shut down over the past year. So business affects most areas of life. And even Hazel Chu talked about her her parents are entrepreneurs, and and we talked about her involvement with that and what she has seen for people running businesses during during the pandemic and stuff like that. So yeah, like, I mean, again, at the end of the day, no matter who you're talking to, whether it's in the same kind of area, you're always talking to someone who has a different story. So each interview is always going to be somewhat refreshing.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite things about journalism. Everything is just like you're kind of, even if it's not an interview, you're kind of being an expert on a different thing each day as you like learn as much as you can, so you can write about it and explain it like the most understandable way
Mm.
possible. Kind of moving on from that. Well, I kind of already answered this question for myself, but I mean, this is a bit of a hard question to answer. But what would you say would be your favorite thing about being a journalist? I mean, it's kind of hard to put a
Oh,
finger on it, but whatever you want to say, it can be stupid or whatever.
um, oh God, I'm not sure. I think it's telling. There's a few things. I think it's telling something. I think it's telling a story or informing people about something that they really had no idea about. Um, that's a great one. There's like a short-term buzz. I'm using buzz an awful lot. It's like it's like news junkie language. But yeah, like there is a certain high that you get when you get a really good quote, and you can just feel it in your body when, like, you're talking to someone, they say something, and you just kind of want to keep it all cool. Um but and you instantly that you're like, oh my God, that was great. So that's great as well. Like, that's a small one. But I think as well, when someone unexpected comes up and said, I really enjoyed that, I didn't know that before. Like, I mean, that's the whole point of the job, is, if somebody comes up to you and they say, my God, yeah, that's crazy, or I really enjoyed this interview, I never knew they were like that, or something like that. Like, I mean, you're a public servant at the end of the day. You're a messenger. So it's when you get that kind of feedback also. And I actually haven't gotten it since I left the College View, which I don't know what that says, but it's also when stories kind of rile people up. I know that's kind of not what I should say, but it's when they cause a reaction. And whether it's a good reaction or a bad reaction, as long as you've done the reporting well and you can stand over your story and say, yeah, absolutely. Seeing the reaction fall out from that is really good. But I think it's, at the end of the day, it's just when somebody comes up to you and said, geez, I didn't know that, or that was a really great interview, I didn't know that they were like that, or something like that. It's not so much praise for yourself. It's more being like, oh, that's great, I did my job.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a great way to put it into words. Like even your thing about the high off a good quote, like I never even thought about expressing that until now, but that's such a good way to put it. You're just there like, oh, this is brilliant. Can't wait to put this could even make the headline or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I have such a bad habit of like, I was interviewing somebody about something, just something bad that happened to them. And then they said something like very, real powerful statement. And I just like, I felt a smile starting to form because I was like, that's such a good quote. But I was like, no, don't look like a complete
Yeah. So
asshole with
this
no
is the
empathy.
difficult part of journalism. Like it really is, because a lot of the time, like most journalism is bad news, because it's the whole thing of dog bites man. It's not really news because sometimes dogs bite people, but it's man bites dog. It's the thing that doesn't happen, and usually the thing that doesn't happen in life is bad news. And I know an awful lot of people say there's enough bad news in the world. People live on bad news. Like, my God, people love it. They are addicted to bad news. That is why we're all in a job. But it's a difficult one, because at one level you really love getting that quote, that all encompassing, or that deep quote or whatever, it really seals the story together. And when I say a high, I do mean like kind of like, geez, I'm going to really push this story. It's going to do so well, and people are really going to be more informed about it. But it's, it is a difficult thing where you make a living out of telling sometimes sad stories. Like, I mean, during the pandemic, an awful lot of a lot of what I did was, people told me about their businesses, and they either had to reinvent themselves, or they were told that they're not essential anymore, or that their lifelong career wasn't essential, or that they're trying everything and they just can't make it work. And it is certainly not a joy to tell those stories. Like, it is a privilege. And to be honest, it was probably, even so early in my career, it was definitely, I would say it will be one of the greatest privileges that I was able to do something during this horrendous time. So it is a high, but it's a high in terms of, God, I really hope this story works for this very difficult situation. I know that sounds kind of paradoxical, but that's kind of what you want to do at the end of the day. And I'm sure you feel the same. Like, it's a very, again, it's a tightrope.
Yeah, I understand completely. Like you feel like you kind of have to, do justice to like the person or the group of people that you're kind of uh doing the piece about, to like represent what's going on for them as well as possible, even if it is sort of a negative, bad news type story, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
But you kind of mentioned there like just the privilege of like people kind of opening up about their issues of business stuff with you. But what would you say has been like your favorite story that you've worked on, either with the College View or the Currency or anywhere
Oh,
else?
Jesus. That is a very, very, very tough one. I I have an awful lot in the Currency. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say one was uh one woman shared with me her experience of racism, but she also worked in marketing. And I know it's kind of like those areas cross quite a bit, where companies started using um the be like the Black Lives Matter. They kind of went on they jumped on that very soon. And so I spoke to her, and she made really good arguments about um how beneficial it is for marketers and companies to kind of push a narrative. Like, sometimes it's not always, like, in my head now, I would say, like, sometimes it may not always be from the right place. Maybe it's from an opportunistic perspective. But after speaking with her, like, the more people do that, the better. And I think it was a really nice story of how a massive important societal issue and business, which is, really kind of makes the world go round, how they intertwined. So that'd be one. And then another, I would say, I did one about how the arts sector is funded and how they lost out during COVID. And it was quite detailed, and it went into an awful lot in a lot of different areas within that. And I think that was one of the that was one of the big features that I wrote, where people came to me in those professions and said, geez, that was great. I didn't realize this part of my own profession, but I do now, and stuff like that. So that was great. And then I would say I'm trying to narrow it down to a third one, because there's about six, but that I'm very, very, very proud of. But I'd say just, the podcast with Liam Cunningham, because it took so many twists and turns, yet it was a great chat. Like, it was a really good chat between two people, and it was very flowy, and it went down. Geez, we talked about politics, we talked about business, we talked about Game of Thrones. Do you know what I mean? It was quite involved. So and you really got to know the character of the real life person of Liam Cunningham, which is always the goal of what you want to do. So I would say for the currency, it would be difficult, but I'd narrow it down to those three. And actually, do you know what? No. Well, actually, yeah, I'm gonna go with those three, but I'm gonna go with one more. And there's a guy who I interviewed, and he's a travel agent, and it was just really interesting to hear how, basically, if the government did nothing, an entire industry of like small businesses would be wiped out from the pandemic if they didn't do anything to help the travel agents. And it was he was a great interviewee. It was a great story to tell. It wasn't great, but it was a privilege to tell it, and that kind of thing. So if I had to narrow it down, it'd be those four, I think. Yeah. And then, yeah, the College View, so many. DCU TV News, so many. But yeah, I could rant on here all day.
I mean, yeah, those are just like just even a handful of stories, and they're so good in such, like, what is it? I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years. Like, so it's a real merit to your work as a journalist that, like, even in such a short amount of time, relatively speaking, like,
don't add 2 years on there. It was 2 years since I graduated, so definitely not 4.
I don't know, just estimating,
No, 2
guesstimating,
years. I graduated in 2019. So but yeah. Yeah, like
we call it the Young Journalist
yeah,
Podcast.
but to be honest, like the College U, again, I will say this, and DCU TV News as well. I mean, like, again, I was, awards are great. They're not the be all and end all, but I was nominated for an award for the work with DCU TV News, and I got to talk to so many nurses. And we covered housing, we covered the nursing strikes. Geez, we covered a big scandal that happened in DCU, which I won't talk about because the last time I talked about this in college, it got me into an awful lot of trouble. So, but like, yeah, so things, you cover really important things in college publications as well. So really go out and try and find those. Like, I mean, the story I told about the student that was there during the Greek fires, like that will remain one of the most important stories that I've told, because it was like, that person took time out of their day to really talk about something very horrific that happened. And so it's not just when you leave college. Like, you can do really important work while you're in college. And like, I mean, you learn an awful lot as well. I mean, things don't always, you learn a lot when you're in college. Sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes you don't. Actually, sometimes people say you make mistakes and you don't at all, and you can turn around and say, actually, no, this is completely fine. And yeah, that's always fun too.
Brilliant, yeah. And lastly, the question that I ask every single guest, you've already spoke about the importance of like good time management and avoiding burnout and just making the most that you can from college publications and college, like MPS type stuff. But what advice would you give to, like, journalists about my age, like, that are looking to, follow in your footsteps and, aim for the best kind of work and best success that they possibly can?
I would say that like, I would definitely, I would re-emphasize one part, which is, especially if you've something else going on, now is the time to really figure out your work ethic and make sure that you don't lose sight of priorities, whether it's your mental health, your physical health, whatever, or something going on in the background. now is the time to figure out that workflow so you don't need to sacrifice anything. And again, I'm saying this as someone who doesn't have a magic bullet, but maybe someone else will figure that out before me. And but also I will say that, just going back to the Trump bump and the focus now on the media and people in the media, I think it's very important that you don't get sucked into being the story and being the journalist and that kind of thing, and that you do as much as you can to be as knowledgeable and as experienced in as many areas as you possibly can. And that doesn't mean rushing through loads of different publications. It means taking your time and really telling stories in one area, maybe going off, maybe traveling, doing something else. But it is to try and become the best journalist that you can. And if you find an area where you're really knowledgeable, or if you feel like you want to go off and you want to do economics and do a master's in economics and be a business journalist, like, and become that niche and really focus in on that area or whatever, like, that would be my advice, is to not get lost in because Twitter is not the real world. It certainly is not the real world. Like, I mean, the common thought on Twitter is not what you will hear on the street. So do not get sucked into that world, because the only people who are on Twitter are people who are in the media, or people who don't like the media, or people who are madly addicted to the media or whatever. Those are the people on Twitter. So you need to get away from that, because your job is not to inform them. Your job is to inform the everyday person, or the person in the niche that you're reporting for. So don't get lost in that. Don't try and become like, for example, like Sarah McInerney and Claire Byrne are the great journalists that they are, is because they honed their skill, not because, and then they became the well-known people and faces that they are. But yeah, I think starting out in your career, it's to really like just get totally immersed in this mad and exciting career.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. That should be like the official motto of this podcast: get totally immersed in this mad and exciting career.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my best advice for you.
That's brilliant. So you heard it here first, guys. Manage your time and just get immersed in this mad and exciting career. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on.
No worries. And don't think everything on Twitter is right, because it certainly isn't. And it's not the real world.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Coach.
No worries, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me on.
Stay tuned for the next episode of Rough Draft, guys, and see you soon.
Thanks, Will.